In the peaceful agricultural kingdom of Freud, the third princess Amaryllis is rarely seen in public due to her supposedly frail health. Because of her constant slumber, she earned the moniker, the Sleeping Beauty of Freud, but her eyes suddenly snap open. Shocking her maid, the princess bolts upright in bed and fiercely demands to eat pudding. Lifting her heavy skirts, a surprisingly energetic Amaryllis sprints down the halls, dragging her frantic maids toward the kitchen to recreate the jiggly treat from her dream. King Dorium has always taken his daughter's reality dreams seriously, using her incredible visions of other worlds and futures to greatly prosper his kingdom in strict secrecy. Standing triumphant in the kitchen, Amaryllis proudly presents her finished pudding to the awestruck chef and maids. As she happily devours her dessert, her brother, second Prince Im, abruptly arrives to summon her to their father's chambers. Entering the grand room, she finds the entire royal family gathered with tense expressions as King Dorium formally invites her to sit down. Sensing the heavy atmosphere, the princess quietly complies. King Dorium grimly reveals that the kingdom of Fonti has been causing friction and arrogantly demanding Freud become their vassal state. Refusing to burden their citizens with heavy tributes, the king asks if Amaryllis has foreseen any military retaliation from Fonti in her dreams, to which she shakes her head. First Prince Spillis interjects, noting that Fonti is indeed preparing for war, but their target is someone else entirely. Im clarifies that diplomatic disputes over the commercial city of Macanucan have pitted Fonti against the powerful Era's empire. Spillis and Dahlia deduce that Fonti's pressure on the independent city will inevitably force Era's to retaliate. When Amaryllis asks if Freud will be dragged into the conflict, Im points out that Fonti currently lacks the military strength to fight Era's directly. With a serious gaze, Spillis deduces there is only one logical move left for their desperate neighbor. Amaryllis gasps in realization, understanding that Fonti will try to forcibly subjugate Freud to absorb their strength and power. King Dorium confirms her fears, explaining that the famine-ravaged Fonti is targeting Freud's rich agricultural wealth, which was cultivated through Amaryllis's dream-given wisdom. Determined to find a peaceful resolution, Amaryllis resolves to force a reality dream about Fonti, but her father solemnly interrupts her. Shocking the room, King Dorium reveals that they have received an alliance proposal from Eras, which requires the two nations to be bound by blood. The king grimly states that the Emperor of Eras desires one of his daughters as a bride for the crown prince. Amaryllis stares at her father in disbelief, wondering which sister the emperor intends to claim. Without hesitation, Princess Dahlia steps forward and volunteers to go, declaring that Amaryllis's wisdom makes her far too essential to Freud. The king notes that while Amaryllis is closer in age to the prince, her public reputation of frailty makes Dahlia the more socially acceptable choice. Refusing to accept this, Amaryllis firmly rejects the idea of Dahlia being sent away. Queen Casablanca interjects, revealing that Dahlia cannot go anyway because she is already deeply in love with a fine man named Arno Bot, leaving Amaryllis stunned. Smiling warmly at her sister's secret romance, Amaryllis recalls that she herself had once rejected Arno as a fiancé, making Dahlia's match even more perfect. Dismissing rumors of the crown prince's violent temper, Amaryllis volunteers to marry him, promising to provide a medical certificate proving her health. Spillis gently interrupts his sister, agreeing with their conflicted father that the fate of both precious princesses cannot be decided so lightly. Im concludes the meeting by declaring their true plan to find a way to stop Fonti's invasion without forcing either sister into a sacrificial marriage. Acknowledging the heavy burden placed upon them, both princesses solemnly agree to the dire circumstances. Meanwhile, the arrogant emperor of Fonti dismisses his subordinates' concerns about provoking the Era's empire, boasting that his superior forces will easily crush Freud's country soldiers. To prevent Eras from intervening, the emperor reveals a shocking timeline, ordering his military to launch a full-scale invasion of Freud in exactly 1 month. Laughing maniacally, the ruthless ruler swears to make Freud regret dodging his demands and promises to make them crawl in utter disgrace. Back in Freud, Lilith jolts awake in her bed, gasping heavily as the horrifying vision fades. Wiping the cold sweat from her brow, the terrified princess scrambles to write down the details of her terrible reality dream before the imminent invasion plans slip from her memory. Sitting alone at her desk, Lilith wishes the looming war was just a nightmare while recalling Arno and Dahlia's brave readiness to sacrifice their own happiness. Her heart aches as she remembers witnessing a tender moment between the deeply in love couple, knowing Arno only views her as a sister despite his willingness to serve. Gazing out into the still dark night, Lilith wrestles with her lingering feelings for Arno before deciding to force herself back to sleep. Plunging back into the dream world, Lilith witnesses a furious, red-haired man, the Crown Prince of Eras, violently arguing with his father against taking another bride. As the rebellious prince vehemently rejects the idea of marrying the Freud princess, he suddenly pauses and seems to sense an unseen presence in the room. Piercing through the boundary of the vision, the prince's intense gaze locks directly onto Lilith, causing her to scream in sheer terror. Jolting awake for the second time, the trembling princess is deeply shaken that someone within a reality dream was actually able to make eye contact with her. Huddling under her blankets, the devastating sting of being rejected by both her childhood crush and her prospective political fiancé washes over her. She bitterly reflects on the endless parade of faceless suitors who only ever sought her hand for political gain. Overcome with isolation, Lilith wonders if anyone outside her family will ever love her for her true self rather than just her royal title. Finding a shred of hope in her family's successful arranged marriages, she realizes that the pre-existing love between Dahlia and Arno is a rare miracle she must fiercely protect. Armed with the terrifying knowledge that Fonte will strike within a month, Lilith resolves that an immediate alliance with Eras is Freud's only chance of survival. Even though the Crown Prince has already vehemently rejected her in secret, she refuses to back down. Rationalizing the looming heartbreak, she decides that offering herself as a political pawn is a flawless strategic victory for Freud, even if the marriage is eventually annulled. Throwing her fist into the air with renewed fiery determination, Lilith excitedly launches Operation Pushy Bride to crush Fonte's ambitions once and for all. Her loyal maid peeks into the bedroom, completely baffled by the princess's sudden burst of manic, late-night energy. Fast forward to departure day, the once confident princess slumps against the banister in an absolute panic as the reality of her decision sets in. Driven by the urgent threat of Fonte's attack, the royal courts rush the alliance proceedings at breakneck speed, leaving Lilith completely unprepared to face the terrifying man from her dreams. Interrupting her spiraling thoughts, her escort arrives at the door to announce that it is finally time to leave. Steeling her nerves, she reminds herself that the Crown Prince was ultimately forced into this arrangement by his father, though her lack of recent visions leaves her completely in the dark. Swallowing her intense anxiety over being hated by her future husband, Lilith shares a heartfelt goodbye with her mother. The king officially entrusts Princes Eam and Lino with safely escorting their beloved sister on the long journey to the Eras Empire. With a final bittersweet smile, Lilith bids farewell to her remaining family members and leaves a special message for the unborn royal baby. Climbing into the carriage with unwavering resolve, Princess Lilith accepts that there is no turning back and vows to endure whatever rejection awaits her for the sake of Freud. Radiating unshakable confidence, Amaryllis declares her master plan to completely charm the Crown Prince of Eras into falling head over heels for her. While riding in a rattling carriage, the princess looks up from her romance guide as her anxious maid gently interrupts her reading session. Clasping her hands nervously, the maid questions why Lilith is calmly reading romance novels instead of fearing her impending marriage to the notoriously intimidating Crown Prince. Whispering dark rumors, the maid explains that the Crown Prince's crimson hair and eyes are allegedly a terrifying blood curse born from the Empire's brutal history of violent invasions. Unfazed by the horrifying tales, Lilith shrugs off the curse by brightly pointing out that having red eyes doesn't mean he literally shoots fire from them. Smiling warmly at her stunned attendant, the princess casually compares the prince's rare crimson eyes to their own ordinary brown and green ones. As the grand carriage rolls forward, the once terrified maids admit that their lady's logical and optimistic perspective makes the impending meeting feel much less daunting. Despite proudly calling herself the beautiful sleeping princess, Amaryllis secretly sweats over whether the overly embellished portrait her father sent will create impossibly high expectations. Peeking toward the window, the princess perks up as her maids announce their imminent arrival at the bustling trade city of Bloom. The loyal maids confidently assure her that the citizens of Bloom will offer a warm welcome since the city prospers directly from lucrative trade with Freud. Beaming with genuine excitement, Amaryllis thanks Tenna Wright as the carriage suddenly comes to a halt amidst the roaring cheers of an eager crowd. Eager to see her welcoming committee, the princess reaches to pull back the carriage curtain but is immediately stopped by her panicked attendants. Shocked by the sudden restriction, Amaryllis stares in disbelief as both maids sternly forbid her from looking out the window. Pouting heavily, the princess begs to at least acknowledge the cheering crowd, but her maids insist that leaning out of a carriage is strictly improper for royalty. Reminding her of her new and heavy burden, The maids explain that the future crown princess of Eras cannot carelessly show her face before the official presentation ceremony. Dropping her gaze with a flash of hidden melancholy, Lilith softly murmurs a cryptic doubt about her ability to fulfill that royal destiny before quickly masking it with a smile. Meanwhile, outside the carriage, a commanding figure in a sharp military uniform strides forward as his subordinate notes the sheer volume of the welcoming crowd. Halting right beside the royal carriage, the imposing officer authoritatively orders a sweating attendant to throw open the door. The heavy carriage door swings wide open, abruptly exposing a wide-eyed Amaryllis to the bright sunlight and the towering man standing before her. Looking down at the startled princess, the crimson-haired commander formally welcomes her to the mighty Eras Empire. Bowing with flawless aristocratic grace, the intimidating man introduces himself as Jesselt, the firstborn son of Emperor Razef. Extending a gloved hand toward the carriage, the notorious crown prince formally offers his services to his future bride. Utterly captivated instead of terrified, Amaryllis gazes in sheer awe at the crown prince's striking crimson hair and piercing red eyes. Gently placing her delicate hand in his, the princess steps gracefully down from the carriage onto the bustling streets of Bloom. Staring up at her towering fiancé, Amaryllis realizes with a fluttering heart that the infamous prince is actually far more handsome than her visions foretold. Her romantic daze is sharply broken when Prince Eam steps forward, lightly scolding his sister for staring so improperly at her future husband. Masking her internal irritation at her brother's strict etiquette reminder, Amaryllis gracefully drops into a flawless curtsy before the imperial royal. Stepping into his diplomatic role, Prince Eam formally introduces himself and confirms the crown prince's identity with a polite smile. Expressing genuine surprise that the crown prince traveled to the border personally, Prince Eam seamlessly takes over the diplomatic pleasantries while Jesselt remains quiet. Concluding their brief streetside summit, the crown prince announces that his steward will arrive shortly to safely escort the Freut delegation to their lodging estate. Observing her speechless reaction to his appearance, he silently concludes that he must dissolve this unsettling engagement before they reach the imperial capital. Arriving at the inn after a long journey, an exhausted Amaryllis stretches her arms and complains about the tiring trip. Hugging a pillow with pure joy, she excitedly declares her desperate need to dive into the fluffy, comfortable bed immediately. Her maids quickly burst her bubble, gently reminding the groaning princess that she cannot sleep yet due to an upcoming welcome banquet. As she prepares for the event, her maids express their lingering fear of the crown prince, asking if Amaryllis is truly unafraid of his terrifying crimson eyes and hair. Sitting calmly on the couch, Amaryllis notes that her maids finally understand why the prince earned the fearsome title of the Crimson Reaper. Dismissing the dark rumors with a bright expression, she candidly admits that she wasn't afraid at all and actually found him beautiful. Realizing they spoke out of turn, the maids quickly bow their heads in deep apology for questioning her judgment. Peeking playfully from behind her pillow, Amaryllis flashes a reassuring smile and forgives them. Having seen countless diverse worlds in her reality dreams, the princess internally reflects that while crimson features are startling to her people, she genuinely finds them breathtakingly unique. Her thoughts drift into a nap, only to be gently stirred awake a short while later by Tenna calling her name. Shaking off her grogginess, Amaryllis stretches energetically as Tenna announces that everything is prepared for the banquet. The diligent maids swiftly surround their mistress, meticulously adjusting her elegant, ruffled gown for the grand evening. Staring at her reflection in the mirror, Amaryllis feels a pang of insecurity, wishing she possessed her sister Dahlia's renowned beauty so Prince Jesselt might have smiled at her upon their first meeting. Her self-deprecating thoughts are abruptly interrupted by a sharp gasp of surprise. Prince Jesselt suddenly appears to formally escort her to the venue, prompting Amaryllis to push aside her doubts and fiercely vow to make herself happy in this marriage no matter what. Entering the dazzling banquet hall filled with nobles, the determined princess steels her resolve to give this dinner her absolute best effort. Despite his unyielding, stoic expression throughout the meal, she refuses to let his coldness break her spirit, mentally pumping herself up to bridge the gap between them. However, breaking through his icy exterior proves to be an impossible task. Later that night, Amaryllis flops onto her bed in utter defeat, groaning about how the prince only replied to her enthusiastic chatter with cold, single-word answers. Refusing to stay down, she throws a determined punch into the air and swears she will eventually force a warm smile onto his gloomy face. Gazing out at the moonlit sky, the stubborn princess vows that she will not lose this battle of wills. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Freud's first prince intercepts Jesselt and firmly requests that they delay their departure because Amaryllis is suffering from travel strain. Jesselt scoffs arrogantly at the delay, cruelly questioning if someone with such a frail, pathetic body can even fulfill her duties as his bride. First Prince Spillis sharply fires back, reminding Jesselt that Emperor Razef approved of this match and that Freud was forced to substitute Amaryllis because Dahlia was already engaged. Fists clenched with protective rage, Spillis declares that everyone in Freud loves Amaryllis dearly and that they never truly wish to hand her over to a foreign power. Glaring at the stunned crown prince, Spillis reveals the heavy truth that Amaryllis willingly volunteered herself to protect her kingdom. Prince Jesselt's eyes widen slightly as he processes the weight of her sacrifice, realizing she made this drastic decision entirely for the sake of Freud. Spillis's expression softens slightly as he proudly describes his little sister as an irreplaceable treasure despite her peculiar quirks. Begging the Reaper to treat Amaryllis with a little more kindness, Spillis successfully extracts a quiet, reluctant promise from Jesselt to at least make an effort. The Crown Prince confidently declares to his aide that he highly doubts the Freud princess will ever warm up to him, suspecting she might even start avoiding him. Staring ahead with a sharp, challenging gaze, he coldly mutters that they will just have to wait and see. A nervous maid timidly calls out to Lady Lilith, interrupting her thoughts. Frustrated by her brother banning comedy acts and mimicking gestures, a desperate Lilith internally screams, wondering how on earth she is supposed to get closer to His Highness. The frantic maid reminds a pouting Lilith that with only 7 days left until the wedding, the soon-to-be couple has spoken less than 5 times. Clapping her hands together, the cheerful maid brilliantly suggests writing a letter to bridge the gap between them. The maid enthusiastically explains that expressing her feelings and interest through a letter is the perfect way to learn more about him. Eyes sparkling with renewed determination, Lilith praises the fantastic idea and immediately resolves to start writing right away. Back in the Era's empire, an aide startles the brooding crown prince by delivering a sudden letter from Princess Amaryllis. Narrowing his eyes suspiciously, the prince opens the thick envelope while wondering what the princess is plotting by sending such sudden correspondence. He lets out a quiet scoff as he begins to analyze the contents. Flipping through the overly stuffed pages, he assumes her brother must have written it for her, given her recent arrogant glares and obvious disdain for the marriage. Looking away, he reflects that if not for the Fonti conflict, this small, delicate princess could have lived happily in Freud instead of being forced to marry someone like him. Startling his aide, the crown prince mutters out loud about what a pitiful thing the whole situation is. Dismissing his concerned aide, the prince quickly tosses the heavily marked-up letter aside and claims nothing is wrong. 2 days later, riding in a grand carriage, Lilith expresses confusion over receiving absolutely no reply to her heartfelt letter. Her maid cheerfully tries to soothe her by suggesting the busy prince simply forgot to send a token reply by accident. Tenna adds that the prince has always been incredibly busy and isolated, lacking even a single rumor about other women as they finally approach the imperial capital. Sighing deeply, Lilith admits she has already accepted that His Highness has absolutely no interest in her. The maids quickly agree that his coldness is completely within expectations for a political marriage. Throwing a triumphant fist in the air, Lilith proudly declares that making an uninterested man fall for her is the ultimate thrill of being a fine woman. Sweating nervously, the maids remind their fiercely optimistic princess that she only has 4 days left to pull off her grand romantic scheme. Ignoring her maid's warnings about reading strange books, Lilith mentally challenges Prince Gisarld Ayres to wash his neck and prepare himself for her arrival. The Freud delegation finally arrives, staring up in absolute awe at the towering, majestic Ayres castle in the imperial capital of Cleana. Lilith's eyes widen in sheer shock as Emperor Razef himself steps out to personally welcome her to the empire. Quickly recovering her composure, she executes a flawless curtsy and deeply thanks the emperor for the incredible honor of a personal greeting. The emperor warmly greets her brother Eam and kindly insists that Princess Amaryllis drop the formalities and be at ease. Thanking him for his consideration, she internally notes that the emperor expertly hid his shock over her appearance. Sitting quietly in her newly prepared room with a cup of tea, she realizes she looks nothing like the frail portrait originally sent to Ayres. With only 3 days until the ceremony, Lilith stares down with heavy doubt, wondering if marrying an uninterested prince is truly the right path. Sipping her tea with quiet resolve, she acknowledges that this union is entirely necessary for Freud's survival. After dismissing her maid with a polite thanks, she reflects on how accepting Erez's alliance was her only option to escape Fonte's devastating flames of war. Though she has known since childhood that a political marriage was her destiny, she wonders why His Highness remains so cold and distant when he should understand their shared duty. Glancing around her extravagant new bedroom, a troubling thought crosses her mind that perhaps he still loves his late wife. She briefly swoons over the tragic romance of him vowing to never take another bride, but quickly scolds herself for romanticizing someone's actual death. Forcing an awkward laugh, she throws herself into bed to sleep before her morbid thoughts can manifest into nightmares. Trying to force pleasant thoughts into her mind, she is suddenly haunted by the vivid, terrifying image of a blood-soaked sword. A heavy dread fills the atmosphere as she stares in shock, shakily calling out to Corina. A horrific scream tears from her throat as she discovers Corina lying lifeless in a massive pool of blood. She stands frozen in pure terror as a bloody massacre unfolds all around her, with men screaming and collapsing in agony. Gasping for breath with wide, panicked eyes, the dark-haired man desperately screams Corina's name. Waking with a start, she realizes she just dreamed of His Highness's late wife, recalling the tragic rumors of her suicide. Pushing herself out of bed, the shaken princess walks across the darkened room and pulls open the window to catch her breath. Gripping the windowsill tightly, she mutters that she has seen worse and promises herself she will be her usual bright self by morning. Finally calming down, a sudden realization strikes her and interrupts her inner pep talk. She innocently wonders if they will have to sleep together like her parents, suddenly panicking because His Majesty still doesn't know about her secret power. Her eyes go wide with absolute panic as she realizes how disastrous this situation could become. Frantically overthinking the physical logistics of their wedding night, she cries out mentally for her mother, realizing she is entirely unequipped to tell him no. Grasping the door handle to calm herself, she rationalizes that his cold demeanor means they probably won't spend the night together anyway. Throwing herself back onto the plush bedding, she cheerfully decides everything will somehow magically work out. As the quiet castle looms in the dark, she firmly orders herself to sleep and aggressively demands a good dream. Walking together the day before their wedding, she boldly demands to know if his refusal to look at her is because she looks completely different from her portrait. He bluntly states he never looked at her heavily beautified portrait, prompting her to furiously scold him for ignoring his future bride. Staring at his back, she stubbornly insists they must speak face to face in order to build a harmonious marriage. He finally turns around with a sharp, intimidating glare, mockingly questioning if she truly expects a harmonious marriage with him. Refusing to back down, the fierce princess aggressively reaches up and squishes his cheeks between her hands. Ignoring his shocked mumbling, she gently but firmly suggests he change his gloomy mindset, acknowledging that his dark past shaped his present self. Pointing fiercely, she clarifies she isn't demanding his love, but threatens to do something crazy if he doesn't at least try to get along. She vividly threatens to climb the highest tower and publicly humiliate him by screaming that he is a gloomy old fossil. Surprised by her sheer audacity, a genuine smile finally breaks across his face, prompting her to happily demand he do it more often. Startled by his sudden grip, she looks up as he coldly questions if her unpleasant smile is part of her grand plan. Disgusted by her forced expression, he sneers that her creepy, fake grin resembles a grim reaper and declares it best to avoid her gaze entirely. Warning her that he has no intention of falling for her manipulative schemes to win him over, he leaves her utterly bewildered. Their tense exchange is abruptly shattered by a sudden commotion as frantic voices shout for His Highness and the Marquis. Yanking her aching hand away as Lady Lilith approaches, the princess boldly accuses His Highness of being entirely too self-conscious. Throwing her arms wide in utter exasperation, she argues that her kingdom only needs his military protection from Fonte and questions what other ulterior motives he thinks she possesses. Sweating nervously, she makes a frantic excuse about being a delicate, sickly princess whose only real desire is to abandon her royal duties and sleep peacefully all day. Quickly trying to recover her dignified composure, she clears her throat and clarifies that her only true intention was to build a somewhat decent relationship with him moving forward. Curtly acknowledging her sentiments, the prince immediately turns his back on her to return to his duties, leaving her fuming internally at his sheer rudeness. Watching the disastrous encounter unfold, her sweating maids quickly realize it is going to be a rough start and nervously decide to retreat. The tense flashback fades into the grand spectacle of their formal wedding ceremony, where the newlywed couple is officially proclaimed husband and wife amidst showering blessings. Returning to the present night in her lavish bedchamber, her dutiful maids bow respectfully and excuse themselves for the evening. Left alone with her racing thoughts, she grimly recalls the strict lectures about a royal bride's absolute duty to fulfill the marital union on her very first night. Looking utterly miserable but resigned to her fate, she resolves to endure the dreaded royal duty and plans to ask him to leave the bed the moment it concludes. A sudden, brilliant spark of inspiration lights up her face as she realizes she can use the terrifying side effects of her magical nightmares as the perfect excuse to avoid him. Throwing her fists up in absolute triumph, she gleefully praises her own genius for concocting a plan to claim she is too weak and must sleep entirely alone. The grandfather clock ticks deep into the late hours of the night, prompting her to let out a massive, unladylike yawn as she waits for her significantly delayed husband. Staring out into the quiet shadows of the grand, empty bedchamber, she realizes there is still absolutely no sign of his arrival. Her eyes snap wide open in a flash of sudden realization, and she immediately bolts upright in her massive bed. Sweating with sheer disbelief and dawning relief, she looks around the silent room and stammers out a hope that he might not be coming at all. Furious at the sheer disrespect, she bursts into his office the very next day and screams at the prince, who is calmly reviewing documents with his aides. Immediately dismissing his bewildered aides, the prince coldly states that he refuses to let even his most trusted subordinates listen to his personal marital matters. Confronting him head-on, she loudly complains that it was incredibly unfortunate he never came to her bedchamber after she had already prepared the maids for his arrival. Unfazed by her irritation, he casually brushes off her concern that his blatantly neglected marital duties would cause a scandalous embarrassment for them both. Leaning in with furious determination, she demands he visit her room tonight and violently threatens to shout his failures from the top of the highest tower if he refuses again. Utterly defeated by her ridiculous blackmail, the prince sighs in deep exasperation and reluctantly agrees to finally visit her. Back in her own chambers, she hums a cheerful, victorious tune while her maids brush her hair, confidently assuring them that her husband will definitely make an appearance tonight. Flashing a brilliant, confident smile and a solid thumbs up, she bids her nervous maids a good night and assures them she has everything entirely under control. Tucked neatly beneath the covers with her hair perfectly brushed, she lies completely still and happily anticipates that her flawless plan is finally falling into place. As the clock mercilessly ticks past midnight, she sits up in the dark with a look of absolute betrayal, realizing that His Highness has completely stood her up yet again. Wiping her mouth with determination, the princess decides to take matters into her own hands. She throws open her doors with an enthusiastic shout to His Highness, declaring she will go to him herself. Bursting into the room, she is instantly met with the terrifying sight of a drawn sword pointed directly at her face. Startled but maintaining a forced smile, she stammers a greeting while the shocked prince recognizes her as Princess Amaryllis. Lowering his blade, the bewildered prince admits he thought she was an assassin, prompting her to gratefully express the exact same fear. Standing awkwardly in his nightclothes, he demands to know why she didn't just come to him if she wanted to meet tonight. Averting his eyes guiltily, he offers a weak excuse that he was simply tired today. Unimpressed by his middle-aged excuse, she watches flatly as he nervously adds that he didn't want to disturb her sleep. Bidding him a cheerful good night, she turns to leave as the flustered prince requests she inform him beforehand next time. The door abruptly shuts on him, leaving the stunned prince to wonder if he is expected to report to her every single day from now on. Sitting down with a heavy sigh, he contemplates her peculiar nature and considers that it wouldn't be wrong to call her an irreplaceable treasure. He vividly pictures her bright smile while quietly repeating the thought of her being an irreplaceable treasure. Resting in his bed, he reflects that until now, the only women entering his room were either skilled assassins or trying to seduce him. Glancing over his shoulder, he realizes that while other women avoided his gaze, this strange princess glared straight at him. Chuckling to himself in the quiet room, he quickly dismisses the notion of her being a treasure as utterly ridiculous. Narrowing his eyes with newfound curiosity, he wonders exactly how she would react if he went to her room. Settling deep into his pillows, he decides he will finally pay her a visit tomorrow. The next day, the prince sits silently in a meeting while older nobles discuss worker complaints from Toyson and a widespread obsession with Shauna's pottery. Meanwhile, the princess lounges peacefully on her bed, recalling a map and remembering that Bun Mini once prospered through or mining. Staring up at the canopy, she struggles to recall exactly where the kingdom of Shauna is located. Standing outside her door that evening, The prince grasps the handle and tells himself not to hesitate since she eagerly wanted him to come. He opens the door only to freeze in shock at the sight of the princess happily rolling around in a tangled heap of blankets. Reveling in the fluffy bed she always wanted to try, she suddenly spots him as he awkwardly attempts to close the door and pretend he saw nothing. Springing upright with a massive, nervous grin, she loudly claims she was simply checking the bed's safety. She throws out her hand and begs him to wait as he begins to close the door with a dry response. Recomposing herself instantly, she sits perfectly straight on the bed and politely invites him to go ahead. A confused prince questions if he did something wrong, only to discover she is completely unaware of the Freud custom where the bride makes the bed herself. Staring blankly at her, he realizes he has been saddled with an unwanted princess who probably has no marriage prospects left. Beaming with innocent cheer, she asks His Highness to teach her, admitting it is her first time and she doesn't know anything. The prince sweats in utter disbelief as she happily adds that her mother told her to leave absolutely everything to the man. Leaning in close, His Highness bluntly asks if she is afraid of him, prompting her to nervously admit that she is a little scared. Looking down at her pityingly, he assumes her mother forced her to endure him even if he were the Reaper himself, though she quickly insists she will get used to it soon. Her eyes sparkling with excitement, she cheerfully hopes they have a baby soon so she can spoil them rotten, completely throwing him off guard. Blushing with a wide, innocent smile, she playfully asks him to stop her if she overdoes it when the time comes. Staring at her in sheer disbelief, he demands to know why she isn't afraid of his red eyes and hair that everyone else considers a terrifying curse. Looking up at him calmly, she points out that many harmless things like dolls or diamonds are called cursed, prompting her to ask what he truly believes a curse is. She casually dismisses the rumors by stating people freeze simply because they are terrified of his glare, asking if there is genuinely anything else about him that justifies the rumors. Leaning closer, she playfully explains that when a beautiful person glares, it is significantly scarier than a normal look. Patting her chest confidently, she reminds him that she is not the fragile beauty from the rumors and assumes he must have been deeply disappointed. Flustered, he firmly denies being disappointed, leading her to realize that he genuinely doesn't care about physical appearances at all. Catching her completely off guard, he awkwardly admits that he actually thought her eyes were beautiful. Her face lighting up with absolute joy, she happily declares that her eyes are her only source of pride before warmly reminding him that he should smile more often. She compares his eyes to gorgeous rubies, softly explaining that people often fear things that are too beautiful even while secretly admiring them deep down. Gazing up at him softly, she insists that his striking hair and eyes combined make him look almost otherworldly. She quickly apologizes for staring because he is so beautiful, leaving him deeply confused and wondering if her bizarre but seemingly genuine behavior is an incredibly skilled act. Turning his back to her, he reflects on how she bizarrely praised his cursed eyes and concludes that there is no mistake about her being incredibly strange. His tone turning icy cold once more, he ruthlessly shuts down her earlier excitement by stating he has no need for children since his cousin Conrad is his chosen successor. Walking out of the room, he formally dismisses her and coldly tells her to live however she wishes in his palace. Left entirely alone, she touches her cheek in sheer disbelief, whispering softly that he actually called her eyes beautiful. Looking out of her window the next day, she watches a grand procession below and wonders if a wedding is taking place. Her eyes widen in shock as she peers closer, realizing that the bride standing below is actually Lady Corina. Watching the scene unfold, she gasps in pure disbelief as she recognizes Lord Jesald waiting at the altar. Pacing her room with a distressed expression, she assures her worried maids she is fine while secretly agonizing over whether His Highness's pained face means he still cannot forget Lady Corina. Haunted by the gruesome, blood-soaked memory of her dream, she desperately wonders what truly happened in the past. Turning to her loyal maids Tenna and Rese, she firmly commands them to gather any rumors regarding the exact reason Lady Corina passed away. The maids exchange a hesitant glance before admitting that they already know the dark rumors circulating about the tragedy. Lowering their voices, they explain that while the death was officially ruled an accident, the reality is shrouded in a murky mix of speculation and rumors. One maid solemnly details how some suspect suicide or an attack by an enemy, but the most prominent belief is that she was brutally murdered. When she hears the darkest rumor claiming His Highness killed Corina himself in a fit of rage, she erupts with fiery denial, shouting that he would never do such a thing. Startled by her passionate and unwavering defense of a man she barely knows, The maids quickly bow their heads and assure her they believe whatever she says. Because His Highness never denied the terrible rumors, people began to fully believe that Lady Corina was killed by the Grim Reaper. The princess realizes that His Highness likely blamed himself entirely for her death and gave up on everything out of overwhelming guilt. The serious maid reveals that after the marriage, Lady Corina often confined herself to her chambers and rarely ever spoke or smiled. Shocking the princess, the maid adds that before her death, Lady Corina would suddenly burst into terrible fits of tears or laughter, leading many to believe she had gone entirely mad. The anxious maids admit they are deeply worried that the staff will soon start claiming the princess is also suffering from His Highness's curse because she frequently stays in her room. The fierce maid proudly declares that they have already been fiercely defending the princess against those who foolishly underestimate her as frail and sickly. Grateful for their support, the princess resolves to smile properly today so she can see her brother Im off without causing him any unnecessary worry. Standing before the grand carriage, she formally bids her brother farewell and asks him to give her warmest regards to everyone back home. Despite her best efforts to remain strong, a stray tear slips down her cheek as she struggles to mask her overwhelming loneliness. Seeing her distress, her brother gently reminds her that it is terribly lonely being separated and that she is always welcome to return home. He warmly assures her that she does not have to force herself to endure a painful life and that their family will gladly handle everything if she chooses to come back to Freud. Deeply moved by his unconditional support, she wipes her tears and firmly insists that he shouldn't worry because she will be perfectly fine. After a brief, light-hearted apology for his emotional words, her brother promises they will always be thinking of her and departs with a final, cheerful farewell. She stands completely alone in her elegant gown, quietly watching the royal carriages shrink into the distance as they travel back toward her homeland. Turning to her loyal maids, she quietly thanks her brother in her heart for giving her the strength she needed. Looking back toward the grand estate, she proudly tells herself that she managed to smile properly until the very end. Strolling back down the sprawling path, she asks her maids if she finally managed to look a little more composed. Steeling her resolve, she definitively tells herself that she is no longer just a protected daughter of Freud. Standing before the massive, imposing palace, she fully accepts her heavy new reality as the crown princess of Eris. That night, her newfound resolve completely shatters as she thrashes in bed, wailing miserably about how much she wants to go home and see Lino. After calming down, she passionately declares to her utterly shocked maids that she has always deeply wanted a baby, but simply never had a partner before. Clasping her hands together dreamily, she sighs about wanting a cute child like Lino, prompting her serious maid to mention there is actually more to Lady Corina's story. The maid seriously reveals the dark, unspoken rumor that Lady Corina was actually pregnant when she tragically passed away. The princess's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated shock as the horrifying weight of the maid's words finally registers. Completely stunned, she desperately tries to process the devastating realization that Lady Corina died with a child in her belly. The maid quickly clarifies that because the pregnancy was never officially announced by the royal family, it technically remains nothing more than a persistent rumor. Overwhelmed by the heavy emotional toll of the tragic revelation, the princess quietly thanks the maid for telling her and asks to be left alone to rest. Sitting alone in the dark, she somberly reflects on the heartbreaking reality that Lady Corina died while carrying a child. She suddenly realizes that the immense trauma of losing both his wife and unborn child must be the exact reason why His Highness adamantly refuses to have children now. Remembering how overjoyed her own family was when her mother was pregnant, she tragically realizes that discovering she was expecting should have been the absolute happiest time of Lady Corina's life. The princess ponders deeply, wondering if Lady Corina suffered from the exact same condition. Recalling a reality dream about maternity blues, she realizes the condition can cause people to become incredibly unstable, short-tempered, and prone to tearful outbursts. Remembering how pained the women looked as they suddenly cried or laughed, she notes that these exact symptoms perfectly match what Resse described about Lady Corina. Shaking her head in furious denial at the overwhelming sadness of it all, she questions if the condition worsened until the lady tragically took her own life. Sprawled out exhaustedly on her massive bed, she stares blankly upward and admits her desperate yearning to see Lino and everyone else. Reaching a solitary hand out into the empty space, her longing gaze softens as she repeatedly whispers Lino's name. In a vivid flashback, a younger Lilith desperately tries to comfort a screaming baby Lino, urging him to be a good boy and stop crying for his big sister. Panic sets in as Lilith helplessly calls out for her mother, unable to calm the crying infant despite him being fed and having a clean diaper. Her mother elegantly swoops in to take the wailing child, gently teasing Lino about his bad mood as she easily cradles him. Lilith watches with quiet relief mixed with a twinge of sorrow as her mother effortlessly soothes the child with gentle pats. She solemnly reflects that despite showering Lino with endless love and care, the infant would always ultimately seek out their mother for comfort. Turning her back on the heartwarming family scene, a profound loneliness consumes her as she realizes her own love simply wasn't enough. Admitting her own selfishness, she tightly grips her chest and resolves to have a child of her own who will truly need her from the bottom of their heart. Holding firm to her conviction, she decides that even without the king's affection or desire for an heir, she will compensate by pouring endless love into her future child. Righteous indignation suddenly replaces her melancholy as she violently throws off her covers, furious that she constantly has to obey His Highness's wishes one-sidedly. Marching aggressively toward the large double doors of her bedroom, she decisively declares that if this is how things are going to be, she will take action herself. The prince begrudgingly opens his door with an irritated scowl, clearly interrupted from his late-night solitude. The princess greets him with a blindingly cheerful smile, causing the prince to sweat as he realizes Amaryllis is exactly as bothersome as expected. Trying to maintain his composure, he awkwardly clears his throat and politely demands to know what brings her to his quarters at this hour. Leaning in with an absolutely shameless expression, she bluntly announces her intention to sneak directly into his bed. The prince stands completely paralyzed in the doorway, his face freezing in an utterly deadpan expression of shock. His brain completely failing to process her audacious statement, he lets out a hollow, bewildered noise of confusion. Scrambling to stop her, he frantically reminds her of her promise not to be a nuisance, but she cheerfully counters that he never explicitly forbade her from bothering him. Striking a dramatic, commanding pose, she fiercely orders him to take responsibility for their marriage and lay his hands on her, completely ignoring his loud protest about reversed gender roles. She proposes a wild compromise, demanding his temporary cooperation to conceive a child that she promises to raise completely independently with boundless love. Beaming triumphantly at her flawless logic, she reiterates her plan to creep into his bed while the defeated prince sulks over her absurd justifications. Before he can fully process the situation or stop her, she rapidly crawls onto his mattress and eagerly urges him to hurry up and get into bed. Massaging his temples in pure agony, the prince agonizes over whether he should simply flee the room, desperately wanting to avoid hurting his exceptionally strange bride. Cutting through his panicked hesitation, the princess firmly corrects him and demands he use her real name. She proudly states that her formal title is no longer appropriate since she is now his wife, leaving the flabbergasted prince to wonder if she is genuinely happy about this bizarre arrangement. Rejecting royal formalities, Lilith eagerly offered the nickname Jess, prompting him to casually suggest they use the name Jed instead. Undeterred by his exhaustion, she firmly stated her desire to talk even if he considered it a complete waste of time. Gently grasping his hand, she brought up a past conversation and directly asked what he would do if their future child inherited his crimson eyes. He worriedly warned her that the trait was a curse they might inherit, but she cheerfully dismissed his concerns by insisting that their health was the only thing that truly mattered. Gripping his shirt in lingering grief, Jed revealed that people blamed this very curse for his mother's tragically premature death. Lilith quickly dismantled the rumor with pure logic, arguing that if the curse of the fallen truly existed, it would have targeted the war-starting Emperor Razef instead of him. Relieved by her flawless deduction, she clapped her hands together in triumph while Jed nervously admitted that he didn't actually believe in curses either. Ducking back under the blankets with a deep bow, she confidently declared she was counting on him while he clutched his face in absolute bewilderment. Staring blankly ahead, he internally panicked as he realized this incredibly bizarre situation was not at all how things were supposed to go. Slowly surrendering to the intimate atmosphere, he softly whispered her name as a heavy blush spread across her cheeks. Closing the distance between them, they gazed into each other's eyes with tender, unspoken affection. Giving in to the moment, he finally leaned over her as the romantic tension peaked. Pulling the sheets up in the aftermath, an incredibly flustered Lilith awkwardly admitted that the experience had suddenly reminded her of changing her one-year-old brother Lino. Jed practically tore his hair out in sheer exasperation, loudly begging her not to compare an intimate moment with an adult man to changing an infant's diapers. Coughing to hide his embarrassment, he decided to just accept her strange character and offered a quiet, genuine word of thanks. Without missing a beat, Lilith cheerfully wished him sweet dreams and slipped out the door, leaving him utterly dumbfounded in his bed. Thrashing wildly under the covers, he practically yelled in shock as she casually tossed out a promise to see him tomorrow. The very next morning, Lilith happily hunted down her maid Tenna to proudly announce that she had successfully completed her night visit. Horrified at the thought of a queen creeping into a bed, Tenna listened in shock as Lilith cheerfully explained how she had worked incredibly hard to make a baby. Sweating bullets, the anxious maid begged her not to tell anyone else, prompting Lilith to smugly assure her that she wasn't stupid enough to broadcast her secret. Gently cradling her stomach with a hopeful smile, she wished for a baby to arrive quickly while Tenna excused herself to prepare a bath. Settling into a chair with an industry white paper, Lilith deeply focused on the economic decline of the mining town Bumini and the struggling stoneware factories of Toizen. Spreading a large map across her desk, she traced her finger across the sea to locate a distant eastern country called Shiana. Sighing heavily over her inability to help the struggling towns, a wave of exhaustion hit her, prompting her to order Tenna to let her take a nap. Snuggling deeply into her pillows, she drifted off while fondly reflecting on how uniquely interesting her night with Jed had been. Confident that the supposed curse was nothing more than a baseless rumor, she resolved to spend more time getting to know her new husband. Her dreams suddenly transported her to the desolate, goat-filled lands of Bumini, leaving her wondering how the harsh region could ever recover its lost vitality. Reaching out to touch a stark white rock face, she marveled at how the bizarre surface felt exactly like a solid wall of ice. The scenery violently shifted in the blink of an eye, dropping her right into the middle of a bustling, unfamiliar dining hall. Realizing she might have slipped into another world entirely, she gasped in awe at the rows of incredibly thin, pure white vessels lining the tables. Recalling a previous dream, Lilith realizes that the soaring popularity of imported Shiana tableware caused Toizen's stoneware sales to plummet, leading to unpaid wages. A sweeping vision reveals the majestic, mountainous landscape of the country of Shiana. Eager to witness their manufacturing process, Lilith excitedly rushes outside to explore. Suddenly, a maid named Rese abruptly wakes her up, completely ruining the most crucial part of her dream. Disappointed to be pulled away right at the best part, Lilith asks Rese to summon Master Frederick for her. As the maid bows and leaves to fetch him, Lilith grabs a pen and prepares to take notes on a specific matter. Arriving with a warm smile, the elderly scholar congratulates Lilith on her marriage and asks what questions she has regarding Toizen's economy. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, Frederick Gregorius, known affectionately as Master Fu, finds her concerns about the economic situation quite strange. Tapping a chalkboard, Master Fu breaks down the differences between the expensive, imported Shiana display pieces and the cheap, widely used domestic Toizen stoneware. Because the domestic stoneware is still widely used, the sage deduces that plummeting sales wouldn't cause unpaid wages and points to embezzlement as the true culprit. Shocked by the corruption, Lilith realizes the Emperor must be blindly trusting falsified reports from bribed inspectors. Closing his eyes with a heavy sigh, Master Fu solemnly admits that His Majesty definitely has his share of flaws. As Lilith laments the tragedy of trusting people only to be betrayed, the scholar notes that the Emperor has suffered countless betrayals from his own vassals. These repeated betrayals completely explain why the Crown Prince developed such a deeply suspicious, cautious, and strict personality. Sipping her tea, Lilith reflects that being called cursed since childhood would twist anyone's personality, recalling Jed's drastically different demeanor during his previous wedding. Noting that the prince changed after his first wife passed away, Master Fu curiously asks what Lilith plans to do now. Confused, Lilith reminds him that her primary goal of forming an alliance with Eras through marriage has already been achieved. Feeling slightly mocked when the old man jokingly suggests she take a nap, Lilith scowls playfully as he chuckles. Suddenly firing up with determination, she dramatically declares her intention to use all her knowledge to foster development and friendship between Eras and Freud. Beaming with pride at her resolve, Master Fu praises the idea and asks what her very first step will be. Slamming her hands on the table, the enthusiastic crown princess shocks the old man by bluntly announcing that she must immediately make a baby to provide an heir. Laughing heartily at her bold priorities, Master Fu wishes her luck and departs, leaving Lilith fully committed to making a baby first and a better country second. Later that evening during his second night visit, a heavily perspiring Jed stares awkwardly at his cheerfully smiling bride. Sweating profusely under the pressure, Jed tentatively asks if she is feeling all right, to which Lilith happily confirms she is perfectly fine. Completely thrown off by her unyielding eye contact, something only his parents have ever done, Jed realizes he still cannot fully trust her. Pinning her down on the mattress, the conflicted prince reminds himself that beneath all his royal burdens, he is still just a man. Leaning in close as she softly calls his name, Jed silently vows to protect Lilith this time and prevent her from suffering Corina's tragic fate. The royal couple lies stiffly side by side in bed, staring blankly up at the ceiling in complete silence. Sitting up and looking utterly exhausted, Jed tells her to rest well and relies on her again for tomorrow. Staring back with a look of absolute determination, Lilith boldly declares that tomorrow, she will be the one going to his room. Beaming with unrestrained joy, Lilith tells a surprised Dahlia that she will eagerly look forward to it. Tossing in bed with a heavy conscience, Jed wonders if he made the right choice before aggressively forcing himself to sleep. Lilith summons a maid named Rese, politely tasking her with an important errand. Upon hearing that Count Bolno has requested an audience, Lilith instructs her staff to allow him entry anytime today. A pair of polished shoes steps into the room as the visitor formally announces his presence to Her Highness. A blonde gentleman introduces himself as Conrad Bonneville, smoothly thanking Lilith for agreeing to his sudden visit. Noting his resemblance to Arno, Lilith recognizes Conrad as Jesseld's cousin and the presumed heir to the Count's title. Conrad self-deprecatingly admits his low tolerance for alcohol due to a sweet tooth, but Lilith warmly defends his preferences. Sweating nervously under the intense glare of a background maid, Conrad awkwardly chuckles at her kind words. Teasingly asking if there is something on his face, Conrad flusters Lilith into apologizing for staring at him. Toying with his rare golden hair, Conrad boasts about his blue eyes and how people frequently glance his way. Mentally comparing his features to Dahlia and Arno, Lilith politely accepts his compliment about her own beautiful eye color. Shifting the topic to Jesseld's rare coloring, Conrad carefully notes that the supposed curse surrounding him is merely a baseless rumor. Explaining that Jesseld's terrifying battlefield prowess inevitably sparked the god of death rumors, Conrad quickly dispels Lilith's sudden fears of an impending war. Apologizing for bringing up such grim topics, Conrad reassures her that the country remains entirely safe as long as His Highness is present. Bowing with dramatic flair, Conrad promises to protect her from harm and urges her to consult him if she ever feels uneasy. Thanking him for his visit as he takes his leave, Lilith privately notes that the charming man seems surprisingly frivolous. Later that night, a shocked Jed freezes in his tracks with wide eyes as he enters the bedroom. Sitting elegantly amidst a massive sea of scattered flower petals, Lilith brightly welcomes her bewildered husband. Staring blankly at the overwhelming floral display, Jed listens in disbelief as Lilith proudly explains she had the maids gather the soon-to-be-cut flowers to celebrate his presence. Offering him a choice of herbal water or alcohol, Lilith watches as Jed raises a hand and hesitantly declines the drinks. Anxiously recalling her maid's warning about men disliking flowers, Lilith nervously asks if her grand gesture has upset him. Gently holding a delicate petal, Jed softly reassures her that he actually does not dislike flowers at all. Staring at the vibrant colors, he somberly recalls that the last time he closely admired flowers was back when his mother was still alive. Beaming with pride, Lilith explains that she personally plucked the petals one by one to create a splendid welcome for her new husband. Moved by the realization that the princess performed manual labor just for him, Jed sits down and seriously asks to talk. Sensing the shift in his demeanor, Lilith sits attentively and waits for him to speak. Looking deeply regretful, Jed formally apologizes for his terrible initial attitude toward her, prompting Lilith to easily forgive him. Touched by her grace, Jed flashes a genuinely handsome smile, leaving Lilith internally flustered as she notes how beautifully strange he is. Leaning in closer with an intense gaze, Jed seriously declares that there is something important he needs her to promise him. Grasping his hand with desperate eyes, Lilith begged Jed to promise he wouldn't overdo things and assured him he could always return to Freud if the future became too difficult to endure. Staring back in stunned silence, Jed paused on the edge of the bed as her unexpected words washed over him. Swiftly pulling her into a warm embrace, he softly confirmed that he understood her heartfelt plea. Gently pinning her down amidst a sea of scattered rose petals, he playfully declared the night was just beginning while she stammered in flustered surprise. While he dryly suggested they skip the messy petals next time, she cheerfully explained that a book claimed they were perfect for enhancing the romantic atmosphere. Beaming with innocent pride, She revealed a guide on marital harmony she had found in the Imperial Library, leaving him completely bewildered as to why the royal family would even own such a thing. Completely misreading his stunned silence, she brightly asked which room they should use tomorrow without petals, leaving him sweating as he wondered if she was already kicking him out. His annoyance flared as he angrily pointed out his exhausting daily schedule compared to her leisurely resting, privately wondering if she was actually testing his manhood. Quickly clearing his throat to regain his dignity, he proudly declared he had absolutely no problem visiting her room from now on, even if his official duties caused a slight delay. Slipping out into the quiet hallway, he silently debated whether her words were born from genuine concern or if she was simply treating him like he was entirely useless. Meanwhile, a serious official presented a stack of new reports, noting with deep concern that the recent findings regarding the Toizen region were incredibly strange. He grimly warned that Fonte's desperate maneuvers and the rumored pirate attacks on merchant ships could quickly escalate the fragile situation into an all-out war. In her private chambers, a polite maid approached Lilith to announce a sudden flood of audience requests and salon invitations. Glancing over the letters with a knowing smile, Lilith accurately deduced that the sudden surge in popularity was entirely because of her public meeting with Conrad the previous day. Sorting decisively through the massive pile, she selected one specific tea party to attend while instructing her maid to decline the remaining audience requests for the day. She explained her calculated choice, noting the absolute necessity of managing her relationship with Duchess Barton, a woman who wielded immense power within the imperial palace. Fully aware that her survival as the crown princess depended on public acceptance, she firmly acknowledged that she couldn't afford to make enemies out of the influential noble ladies. Arriving at the elegant tea party, Lilith was immediately greeted by the sharp, calculating smile of Duchess Barton. Maintaining a flawless facade, Lilith politely thanked the powerful Duchess for the generous invitation and claimed she was highly entertained. Feigning a sudden wave of exhaustion, Lilith gracefully excused herself midway through the gathering while the Duchess offered a practiced, sympathetic smile. Striding purposefully away from the suffocating party, Lilith silently celebrated her success in gathering the critical information she needed. She sharply contrasted Madame Aqueed's exhausted appearance with Baroness Court's luxurious attire, noting the latter seemed suspiciously well off despite her factory's massive unpaid wages. Dropping her fragile act the second she was safe, Lilith cheerfully declared to her worried maid that she could finally go back to being a comfortable shut-in. Later that evening, an utterly exhausted Jed walked into her bedroom and offered a quiet, weary greeting. Leaning in closer, his face etched with genuine concern as he gently asked if she was feeling all right. Having heard about her early departure from the tea party, he firmly insisted she rest, completely ignoring her cheerful admission that she had already taken a long nap. When she suddenly piped up to make a request, he immediately shot her down and strictly ordered her to focus entirely on resting. Staring at his stubborn face in utter disbelief, she asked to schedule a meal together in 2 days so she could formally present her request then. She brightly explained that voicing a wish in the sleeping chamber was strictly forbidden, as old teachings warned it could cause the entire nation to fall into catastrophic disorder. Utterly defeated by her bizarre logic, Jed sighed and promised to arrange their lunch, prompting Lilith to beam at him with pure, radiant gratitude. Breaking the awkward silence, Jed abruptly bids Lilith good night and takes his leave. Lying alone in her massive bed, Lilith sighs heavily as she realizes that despite it being her own fault, he won't be doing anything with her today. Spotting a collection of bottles nearby, a sudden realization hits Lilith as she wonders if Jed was actually overexerting himself just for her sake. Staring closely at the assorted liquor bottles on the table, she specifically hones in on a large bottle of apple cider. Deciding to drown her lingering sorrows, Lilith aggressively tips the massive bottle back and chugs the drink straight from the glass. Flushing heavily from the potent liquid, the heavily intoxicated princess lets out a loud, undignified burp as her vision completely blurs. Drifting back into her dreamscape, a nauseous Lilith spots a familiar plume of smoke and realizes she has returned to the exact same place as before. Disoriented and overwhelmed by her churning stomach, she frantically questions the true nature of her mysterious surroundings. Approaching a rack of drying bowls, she notices someone working nearby but finds the Shiana-style ceramics completely bland and uninspired. Suddenly struck by a terrifying realization about how ceramics are actually supposed to be made, her eyes widen in absolute horror. Meanwhile, outside in the waking world, a perplexed owl perches on a branch as loud, violent gagging noises echo from the princess's bedroom. Utterly defeated by the alcohol, Lilith lies face down on the floor in a miserable, motionless heap. Glaring at the completely empty bottle, a deeply unimpressed maid asks the hungover Lilith if she seriously drank the entire thing by herself. Shivering and groaning on the floor, Lilith reluctantly accepts a glass from the maid, who promises the drink will help soothe her terrible nausea. Staring suspiciously at the foul-smelling black liquid, Lilith questions the contents only for the deadpan maid to assure her the medicinal herbal tea tastes just as awful as it looks. Ordered to down the disgusting brew in a single gulp, the miserable princess pinches her eyes shut and aggressively throws the liquid back. Slamming a second massive glass onto the tray, the relentless maid aggressively demands that her lady drink one more cup. Warned that she must drink 2 cups to recover in time for her promised lunch with His Majesty, Lilith furiously chugs the second glass. Finally tucked safely back into bed, an exhausted Lilith weakly thanks Tenna while the loyal maid advises her to get some much-needed rest. Bowing gracefully as she pulls the heavy doors shut, Tenna promises to return and wake the princess when it is time for her appointment. Staring blankly up at the ornate ceiling, Lilith deeply regrets drinking so heavily over such a trivial matter. Reaffirming her true purpose, she reminds herself that this is strictly a political marriage and her only goals are producing an heir and building the country. Slipping back into her previous dream, Lilith observes a massive workshop and realizes they are using solid white rock instead of kneaded soil to form the clay bodies. Watching the massive water wheels pulverize the white stone into clay, she deduces the firing process for the pristine but unglazed vessels. Recognizing the complex manufacturing method of Shiana ceramics, Lilith calculates that she can repeatedly visit this dream realm to fully grasp the technique. Just as Tenna cracks the door open to check on her, Lilith silently commits to visiting the dream world a few more times to perfectly extract the knowledge. Overflowing with renewed confidence, the princess boldly declares that her prophetic dreams are fully supporting her political ambitions. Later at lunchtime, a brightly smiling Lilith greets the crown prince on a sunlit balcony, though Jed glares in utter confusion at the romantic setup. Ignoring his visible irritation, Lilith cheerfully credits Dennis for the lovely outdoor dining arrangement while Jed furiously demands to know why they are eating outside. Slamming her cup down, an impatient Lilith ignores his complaints about strange rumors and insists they skip the pleasantries to get straight to the point of their meeting. Lilith enthusiastically reminds His Highness of his promise to have lunch with her, offering to treat it as a mere formality if he prefers, while his aide urgently advises him to return to his busy schedule. Beaming brightly at the men, Lilith's unwavering smile forces the exasperated prince and his nervous aide into a stunned silence. Defeated by her persistence, His Highness aggressively drinks from his cup and begrudgingly agrees to eat with her on the balcony, much to the aide's visible relief. Seated across from her, His Highness cuts straight to the chase and demands to know what her ultimate request actually is. Clasping her hands together in pure joy, Lilith cheerfully declares that she wants to go on a honeymoon, leaving both the prince and his aide utterly dumbfounded. Ignoring His Highness's objection that ordinary society does not apply here, Lilith argues that regular newlyweds take time off to travel, viewing a honeymoon as the perfect opportunity to learn new things about each other. When His Highness firmly states he lacks the time for a trip, Lilith counters by asking if a war would break out if he were absent for 20 days, prompting him to deny such an extreme scenario. While the frantic aide panics over her audacity, Lilith smoothly suggests framing the trip as an inspection to bypass his demanding workload, noting that capable people mistakenly believe their workplace cannot function without them. Sipping from a lovely Shiana cup, Lilith casually mentions her preference for Toizen stoneware and reveals she specifically wants to visit the town of Toizen for their honeymoon. Smirking at her modest proposal to buy just 1 or 2 souvenirs to boost sales, His Highness haughtily asks who she thinks he is, just as she recounts a noblewoman's lament about Toizen's struggling stoneware market. Smiling confidently, Lilith points out that women create most trends and asserts that her immense influence as the crown princess will naturally revitalize Toizen's sales if she is seen purchasing their goods. Sipping his tea thoughtfully, His Highness silently admits her plan is highly efficient, as it would allow him to directly investigate the situation in Toizen under the guise of a honeymoon. Accepting her request in principle, His Highness narrows his eyes and questions why she is so personally concerned about the affairs of Toizen. Acknowledging that excellent political officers normally handle these matters, Lilith earnestly explains that everyone desires to cherish the country, recalling how her mother and sister actively helped solve problems back in Freud. Continuing her passionate defense, Lilith argues that it is only natural for a crown princess to care, emphasizing that incorporating women's opinions offers fresh perspectives that can yield surprising solutions. Conceding that she might have a point, His Highness states he cannot give an immediate answer but promises to think about it, prompting a grateful Lilith to excuse herself from the table. Back in his office, His Highness reviews documents and silently agrees with Lilith's assessment that a 20-day absence touring the Toizen region wouldn't attract too much suspicion. His Highness asks Julio if a 20-day absence is possible, internally questioning if Lilith's proposal was genuinely born of concern for the country, before scolding himself for being rude to her intentions. When a bewildered aide assumes the leave is for an inspection, His Highness sharply corrects him with a confident grin, declaring that he is thinking of going on a honeymoon. The aide brilliantly suggests taking the consort to Bunmini, a rugged mining town, under the pretense of a honeymoon, allowing His Highness to investigate his concerns firsthand while seeing how Lilith reacts to the harsh environment. Ordering Julio to send a messenger to arrange another meeting with the consort, His Highness seriously reflects on whether Lilith's frail health can even withstand such a demanding trip. Meanwhile, a maid named Tenna cries out in shock upon hearing that Lilith was turned down by His Highness, though Lilith sympathetically assumes he left early because he noticed her exhaustion on her day off. Startling the maid with a sudden realization, Lilith frantically asks what would happen if she were pregnant, lamenting that she likely won't have a baby for a while. Panicking over the alcohol and medicinal herbal tea she consumed, Lilith worries she might have harmed a hypothetical baby, though Tenna calmly reassures her that the tea was specifically prepared with her health in mind. Still deeply distressed despite knowing the facts, Lilith listens as Tenna sternly reminds her to be more aware of her role as crown princess and forbids her from repeating yesterday's reckless actions. Reflecting sadly on the previous day, Lilith recalls that His Highness seemed angry and immediately returned to his room after she made her request, making her feel truly rejected. Tears welling in her eyes, Lilith wonders aloud if her rude attitude at noon caused the rejection, prompting a deeply concerned response from Tenna. Embracing the crying princess, Tenna gently comforts her by explaining that His Highness acted out of genuine concern for her health, proving he is not the terrible person the rumors claim. Wiping away her tears, Lilith happily agrees with Tenna's assessment and enthusiastically promises to eat her dinner properly so she can get well soon. Later, while speaking with another maid, Lilith notes that the noble ladies are quite sympathetic toward her, leading her to question why everyone so stubbornly believes the rumors about His Highness being cursed. Tenna smiles brightly, admitting that she was initially afraid of the prince but now realizes he is completely different from the terrifying rumors. Lilith confidently states that the gossip will eventually fade as long as she remains healthy, though a senior maid points out that the older staff still firmly believe the vague tales. Realizing that pregnancy would force her to halt her physical activities with Jed, a determined Lilith completely swears off alcohol and reckless dives into bed. Clutching her dress with a heavy sigh, she contemplates her ultimate goal of securing an heir. Panic suddenly sets in as she realizes that asking the royal midwife for early pregnancy advice would instantly spark a massive, unwanted commotion across the estate. Struck by a sudden epiphany, her face lights up with a brilliant idea to consult Master Fu for guidance. Sitting before the elderly Master Fu, she listens as he calmly reassures her that unborn babies are surprisingly resilient and advises her to simply act with a bit more caution. Completely exasperated by her extreme overthinking, Master Fu aggressively scolds her, warning that prematurely halting her nighttime activities will guarantee she never gets pregnant. Bursting into hearty laughter, the old master teases her about the prince's bedroom demeanor, playfully suggesting they simply avoid being too rough instead of stopping entirely. When Lilith points out that the noble ladies were also gossiping, Master Fu apologizes for his rudeness and casually dismisses the crude behavior of men. Lilith insists her relationship is merely a political compromise devoid of affection, causing Master Fu to dramatically erupt with passion about crossing the boundary of true love. Slumping back into his ornate chair, the old master sighs and surprisingly concedes her logical point. Eager to change the subject, Lilith clasps her hands and describes a vivid dream of a Shiana pottery workshop, prompting Fu to declare that recreating such white vessels would make them incredibly wealthy. As Lilith gleefully imagines drowning in vast riches, Master Fu bursts into booming laughter at the sheer absurdity of their ambitious crown princess. Flashing a confident wink at her mentor, Lilith confirms that this grand economic scheme is exactly why she specifically requested a trip to the pottery town of Toizen. While Master Fu strokes his chin wondering how to convince the prince, Lilith leans across the table with a dazzling smile, pitching her dream of manufacturing Shiana-style ceramics locally. Examining the tea set closely, Master Fu questions the feasibility of the project, but Lilith firmly assures him that the Toizen kills are more than capable. She confidently explains that the abandoned white rocks in the Bun Mini mine ruins provide the perfect raw materials, citing her prophetic dream as absolute proof of the method's success. Staring at his teacup in absolute shock, Master Fu reveals that a single high-grade tea set costs as much as the entire annual subsidy for the Bun Mini mining town. Trembling slightly as she lowers her cup, Lilith recalls the sheer volume of expensive porcelain casually used at the Duchess's recent tea party. Staring blankly ahead, Lilith quietly reflects on the staggering wealth disparity she has witnessed, prompting Fu to gently ask what she intends to do about it. Gripping her teacup with renewed resolve, she declares her ultimate goal of nation-building to ensure no citizen ever goes hungry, inspiring an impressed Master Fu to offer his assistance. Staring intensely at the table, Lilith mentally calculates how to quickly manufacture a valid excuse to inspect the Bun Mini mines firsthand. Suddenly, the door swings open to reveal a breathless Jed, who earnestly asks for a moment of her time before she goes to sleep. To her absolute astonishment, Jed kindly suggests adding the rugged town of Bun Mini to their itinerary so he can personally guide her, leaving Lilith deeply moved by his unexpected thoughtfulness. Seeing right through her innocent facade, Jed smirks as Lilith nervously admits to plotting with the local ladies, though he gently warns her that the barren, rocky terrain will be a stark contrast to her lush homeland. Taking a seat on her bed, Jed expresses genuine concern that the bumpy carriage ride might aggravate her fragile health, forcing a panicked Lilith to frantically maintain her sickly persona. Flashing a reassuring smile, Lilith insists she is perfectly accustomed to mountain roads and begs him to proceed with the travel plans. Gently clasping his hand in hers, she softly requests a slow, leisurely journey so they can personally greet the citizens along the way. Blushing deeply, she shyly confesses her ultimate desire for the kingdom's people to truly acknowledge her as his loving wife, completely flustering the stoic prince. Breaking the awkward silence, Lilith lightly pats Jed's shoulder and playfully insists they can just laugh off the ridiculous curse rumors. Realizing his true intent, Lilith gasps and deduces that Jed deliberately chose Toizen for their honeymoon so they could investigate without raising suspicion. Staring intently at her, Jed asks how much she knows and questions if her desire to visit Bun Mini means she actually intends to conduct an inspection. Lilith explains she suspected financial trouble when Baroness Court complained about plummeting stoneware sales while wearing gorgeous jewelry, prompting Jed to apologize for underestimating her political experience. When Lilith asks if he still has work remaining or needs anything else, Jed firmly states he will adjust the schedule to accommodate her points and contact her once decided. Refusing to let him leave so quickly, Lilith grabs his arm with a bright smile and insists that she is completely well so he should stay and relax a little longer. Taken aback by her sudden touch, Jed looks completely surprised as Lilith leans in affectionately and asks if he is feeling tired. Breaking his usual stoic demeanor, Jed suddenly bursts into genuine, hearty laughter, leaving Lilith completely stunned by his bright smile. Thrilled to finally hear him laugh and say, "Good night," for the very first time, an overjoyed Lilith celebrates her incredible luck. Shifting back to business, Lilith excitedly tells Professor Fu that with the Toizen and Anmanai routes resolved, they must now carefully decide which potters to use if corruption is happening. Shocked when the professor casually suggests leaving the personnel selection to His Highness, Lilith flusters and wonders if he expects her to actually speak to Jed about it. Chuckling softly, Professor Fu assures her that His Highness will accept the plan and advises her to just add a little embellishment instead of telling him absolutely everything. When Lilith complains that claiming she happened to know the method sounds way too forced, the professor gleefully argues that people will easily believe a secret invention since foreign spies are everywhere. Agreeing that the explanation works, Professor Fu warns she still needs a skilled potter to practice the technique, suggesting she claims she learned it from someone studying abroad. A dark vision illustrates the terrifying reality that revealing her rare knowledge could put the Freud royal family's future consort in grave danger from shadowy figures seeking her secrets. Gesturing dramatically to the heavily armed guards, Professor Fu reminds her that the country's succession issues and past wars mean she has likely earned dangerous grudges. The old sage explains that while securing the materials is the real issue, arranging a safe talk with His Highness will be much easier once her own safety is solidified. Just as Professor Fu asks Conrad for his opinion on the matter, a maid suddenly interrupts to announce that Count Borneau has arrived. Despite her surprise at the sudden visit, Lilith gracefully permits the maid to show the unexpected guest inside. Bursting into the room with dramatic flair and sparkling energy, Count Borneau loudly expresses his immense relief at seeing Lilith well after hearing she collapsed at his mother's tea party. Sweeping past the formalities, Borneau quickly assumes his forceful mother pushed Lilith too hard before enthusiastically greeting Professor Frederick. Laughing heartily, Professor Fu introduces himself as Johann Frederick and compliments the flamboyant Count's wonderfully excellent spirits. Leaning in with a dazzling smile, Borneau praises King Drom's wit while completely brushing off the professor's prestigious background, finding it amusing that he doesn't claim the title of Count. Watching the flamboyant Count laugh off the conversation, an exasperated man silently questions if the Emperor is truly serious about making such a hopeless fool his successor. Dropping his dramatic act, Borneau seriously asks Lilith if she is only going to Toizen because she couldn't refuse His Highness, offering to intervene on her behalf. Shaking his head frantically, Borneau insists that taking the consort to a place with such terrible security is outrageous and suggests finding a beautiful spot within the country instead. With a wide, eager smile, the Count excitedly offers to act as her personal guide since His Highness has been extremely busy lately. Completely ignoring the offer, Lilith calmly excuses herself while Professor Fu watches the flustered Count awkwardly wave goodbye. Once alone, the group candidly discusses the terrifying reality that if the foolish Conrad inherited the country, a devastating civil war would break out immediately. Staring off with newfound clarity, Lilith realizes the Emperor aggressively pushed for her marriage not to elevate Conrad, but to ensure His Highness Jed safely becomes the next emperor. Gazing out thoughtfully, Lilith wonders if His Highness is truly okay despite his good eye for people, quietly questioning if His Majesty's true intentions might be entirely different. Expressing her gratitude for his visit, Lilith bids a polite farewell to her elderly guest as he respectfully takes his leave. Recalling her unsettling interaction with Conrad, Lilith narrows her eyes and tries to pinpoint exactly what feels so incredibly wrong about him. Bursting into the room with frantic energy, Jed demands to know if Lilith actually wants to visit Toizen, claiming Conrad told him she was forcing herself to go just to appease his interests. Throwing her hands up to stop his rapid-fire accusations, Lilith desperately clarifies that she genuinely wants to visit Toizen and would even love to see the mining town of Bunmini. Explaining that she heard about the region from Mrs. Aquaid, Lilith eagerly expresses her desire to help, leaving Jed utterly confused as to why Conrad claimed she was feeling pressured. Dropping her polite filter, Lilith complains that Conrad is ridiculously self-centered and incapable of reading the room, causing Jed to suddenly flinch as realization strikes him. Bursting into genuine laughter at her blunt assessment, Jed admits that no one has ever described his cousin so accurately, prompting Lilith to curiously ask why Conrad is even considered for the succession. Turning serious, Jed theorizes that Conrad purposely acts like a fool to make the cursed crown prince look like the only viable option for the throne, effectively silencing the opposition. Staring at his surprisingly gentle smile, Lilith realizes with wide eyes that Conrad actually has zero interest in stealing the throne. Beaming with excitement, Lilith happily declares that she is diligently studying the kingdom's history, causing Jed to softly ask if she truly has no hesitations about their upcoming trip. Turning his gaze away with a heavy expression, Jed solemnly states that they need to have a child to honor Conrad's sacrifices, leaving Lilith momentarily stunned. Gripping her bedsheets tightly in frustration, Lilith desperately tries to calm her racing heart, painfully realizing that Jed still believes his cousin's words over hers. Staring at the memory of his distant expression, a heartbroken Lilith whispers into the dark that she truly wants a baby, but not if he looks at her with such tragic resignation.